What happens when a decorated military commander becomes the prime suspect in the most notorious cryptocurrency fraud of the decade? How does a woman who dedicated her life to serving her country find herself facing accusations of orchestrating a billion-dollar digital heist? Can the truth emerge from the labyrinth of lies, manipulation, and cutting-edge technology that threatens to destroy everything she's built? The courthouse stood like a fortress against the gray October sky, its imposing granite columns casting long shadows across the plaza where journalists clustered like vultures around a fresh kill. Commander Mary Thompson, her shoulders rigid beneath her perfectly pressed dress uniform, walked the gauntlet of flashing cameras and shouted questions with the same disciplined stride that had carried her through 23 years of military service. Her face remained a mask of composed dignity, but those who knew her could see the storm brewing behind her steel-gray eyes. The media had dubbed it Crypto Crash 2024, the collapse of the Delta Vault cryptocurrency exchange that had wiped out the life savings of over 800,000 investors worldwide. $2 billion had simply vanished into the digital ether, leaving behind only encrypted wallet addresses and a trail of devastated families. At the center of it all sat Commander Mary Thompson, former head of the Pentagon's Cyber Defense Initiative, accused of using her military clearance and technical expertise to orchestrate the greatest financial crime of the digital age. Inside Courtroom 7 of the Federal District Court, the atmosphere was electric with tension. The gallery was packed to capacity with victims, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and desperation. Some clutched photographs of homes they'd lost, others held printouts of their children's college fund statements, now worth nothing more than digital dust. In the front row sat Margaret Chin, a retired nurse who had invested her entire pension in what she thought was a secure military-backed cryptocurrency platform. Her weathered hands trembled as she stared at the woman she blamed for destroying her golden years. Judge Harrison Matthews, a silver-haired veteran of countless high-profile cases, called the court to order with a gravity that silenced even the most persistent whispers. His dark eyes surveyed the packed courtroom before settling on the defense table where Commander Thompson sat beside her attorney, David Krojcek, a man whose reputation for defending the impossible had made him both famous and feared in legal circles. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Matthews began, his voice cutting through the air like a blade, "we are here to determine the truth behind one of the most complex financial crimes in modern history. The defendant stands accused of conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and abuse of government resources. These are serious charges that strike at the very heart of public trust." Prosecutor Elena Vasquez rose from her chair with the predatory grace of a seasoned hunter. At 42, she had built her career on taking down white-collar criminals who thought themselves untouchable. Her opening statement began with a PowerPoint presentation that painted Commander Thompson as a master manipulator who had used her military credentials to gain the trust of innocent investors. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Vasquez's voice rang clear and sharp, "the evidence will show that Mary Thompson didn't just betray her country's trust, she weaponized it. Using classified military encryption protocols and her position as head of the Pentagon's Cyber Defense Initiative, she created what appeared to be the most secure cryptocurrency exchange in existence. Delta Vault wasn't just another digital currency platform, it was marketed as a patriotic investment, backed by military-grade security and endorsed by a decorated war hero." The prosecutor clicked to the next slide, revealing a photograph of Commander Thompson in full dress uniform, standing before the American flag at a Delta Vault promotional event. The image showed her addressing a crowd of eager investors, her medals gleaming under the stage lights, her expression one of absolute confidence and integrity. This woman, Vasquez continued, pointing directly at the defendant, stood before thousands of Americans and promised them that their money would be protected by the same systems that guard our nation's most sensitive secrets. She told them that Delta Vault was different, that it was built by patriots for patriots. She convinced a grandmother from Ohio to invest her life savings. She persuaded a disabled veteran to put his disability benefits into what he thought was a secure military fund. She looked these people in the eye and lied. As Vasquez spoke, the courtroom's attention was riveted on Commander Thompson. She sat perfectly still, her posture erect, hands folded neatly on the table before her. Her uniform was immaculate, every ribbon in its proper place, every crease sharp enough to cut paper. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of pain that contradicted the prosecution's narrative of cold calculation and greed. The prosecutor's presentation continued with a bewildering array of technical evidence, blockchain analyses, wallet transfers, encrypted communications, and financial records that painted a picture of systematic theft. According to the government's case, Commander Thompson had used her military clearance to access classified encryption algorithms, which she then implemented in Delta Vault's security system. This had given her unprecedented access to user funds, which she systematically siphoned into offshore accounts over a period of 18 months. The defendant's military record is indeed impressive, Vasquez acknowledged, her tone suggesting that this made the alleged crimes even more heinous. She served with distinction in Iraq and Afghanistan. She earned a Bronze Star for valor. She was trusted with our nation's most sensitive cybersecurity protocols. And she used every ounce of that trust to rob the American people blind. When it came time for the defense, David Krajcek rose slowly, his weathered face bearing the weight of decades spent fighting impossible battles. He was a legend in legal circles, known for his ability to find the truth in the most complex cases. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his suit impeccably tailored, but there was something about his demeanor that suggested he was about to reveal secrets that would shake the very foundations of the case. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Krajcek began, his voice carrying the authority of absolute conviction. What you have just heard is not the truth. It is a carefully constructed lie, built on circumstantial evidence and the government's desperate need to find someone to blame for a crime they cannot solve. Commander Mary Thompson is not the villain in this story, she is its most tragic victim. Krajcek moved closer to the jury box, his eyes meeting those of each juror in turn. The prosecution would have you believe that a woman who spent 23 years defending this country suddenly decided to become a common thief. They want you to ignore the fact that she reported suspicious activity at Delta Vault to her superiors 6 months before the exchange collapsed. They want you to forget that she voluntarily turned over her personal financial records to investigators, revealing a modest military salary and a small savings account, hardly the lifestyle of someone who stole $2 billion. The defense attorney clicked his own presentation remote, revealing a photograph that made several jurors gasp. It showed Commander Thompson in a field hospital in Kandahar, her uniform stained with blood, her face streaked with dirt and exhaustion as she worked to restore communication systems under enemy fire. The image was a stark contrast to the composed figure sitting at the defense table. This is who Mary Thompson really is, Krajcek continued, his voice heavy with emotion. A soldier who risked her life to protect others, who earned her Bronze Star by running into enemy fire to restore communications for a surrounded unit. She saved 17 lives that day, and she never once asked for recognition or reward. Does this look like the face of someone who would steal from the American people? As the trial progressed through its first week, witnesses took the stand one by one, each adding their piece to the complex puzzle. The prosecution paraded a series of victims before the jury, ordinary Americans whose lives had been destroyed by the collapse of Delta Vault. There was Robert Martinez, a construction worker who had invested his accident settlement in what he thought was a secure military fund. His wife testified through tears about how they had lost their home when the exchange collapsed. Sarah Williams, a military spouse whose husband was deployed in Syria, described how she had trusted Commander Thompson because she was a fellow service member. She understood what it was like to sacrifice for your country, Sarah testified, her voice breaking. I thought she was one of us. But the defense began to chip away at the prosecution's narrative with surgical precision. CrowdSec called Dr. James Patterson, a cryptocurrency expert from MIT, who testified that the technical complexity of the alleged crime would have required a team of at least 50 programmers working for over 2 years. One person, even someone with Commander Thompson's expertise, could not have pulled this off alone, Dr. Patterson stated firmly. The real breakthrough came when CrowdSec called his star witness Marcus Reed, a former NSA cryptographer who had been quietly investigating the Delta Vault collapse on his own time. Reed, a nervous man in his 30s with thick glasses and the pale complexion of someone who spent too much time in front of computer screens, took the stand with a thick folder of documents. I've been analyzing the blockchain data from Delta Vault for the past 6 months, Reed testified, adjusting his glasses nervously. What I found doesn't match the government's theory at all. The theft wasn't carried out using military encryption protocols. It was done using a sophisticated AI system called Phantom Protocol that has never been used by any government agency. Reed's testimony sent shockwaves through the courtroom. He explained that Phantom Protocol was a cutting-edge artificial intelligence system developed by a shadowy group of programmers known only as the Collective. This system was designed to infiltrate cryptocurrency exchanges and steal funds through a process called ghost trading, creating phantom transactions that appeared legitimate but actually transferred funds to hidden accounts. The Collective has been behind at least 12 major cryptocurrency thefts in the past 3 years, Reed continued, his voice growing stronger as he warmed to his subject. They're responsible for over $5 billion in stolen cryptocurrency worldwide. Delta Vault wasn't their first target, and it won't be their last. As Reed spoke, Commander Thompson's face remained impassive, but her attorney noticed her hands had begun to tremble slightly. This was clearly the first time she was hearing about the Collective and their role in the crime she had been accused of committing. The prosecution fought back hard, bringing in their own technical experts who disputed Reed's findings. They argued that the Collective was a myth, a convenient boogeyman created by criminals to cover their tracks. But Reed had come prepared with evidence that was impossible to ignore, detailed transaction logs showing the exact methods used by the Collective in previous thefts, and how they matched perfectly with the Delta Vault breach. The smoking gun, Reed testified, pulling out a printed screenshot, is this transaction pattern here. It's like a signature. The Collective always leaves this specific sequence of microtransactions when they complete a theft. It's their calling card, and it's present in every single one of their confirmed heists, including Delta Vault. Judge Matthews leaned forward, studying the evidence with intense concentration. Mr. Reed, are you saying that this pattern appears in the Delta Vault theft?
Yes, Your Honor.
multiple instances starting 6 months before the final collapse. Someone was using Phantom Protocol to slowly drain funds from user accounts while making it appear that Commander Thompson was responsible. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, and Judge Matthews had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. In the gallery, victims looked confused and desperate. If Commander Thompson wasn't guilty, then who had stolen their money? And more importantly, would they ever get it back? But the defense wasn't finished. Krajcek stood again, this time holding a sealed envelope. "Your Honor, I have one more piece of evidence that I believe will conclusively prove my client's innocence. 6 months ago, Commander Thompson approached her commanding officer with concerns about unusual activity at Delta Vault. She was told to continue monitoring the situation and report back. What she discovered led her to create a secret investigation file, documenting everything she observed." Krajcek opened the envelope and removed a thick stack of documents. These are Commander Thompson's personal investigation notes, submitted to her superiors but ignored by the initial FBI investigation. They show that she was actually trying to track down the real thieves, not cover her own tracks. The documents painted a completely different picture of Commander Thompson's final months at Delta Vault. Rather than a criminal mastermind, they revealed a dedicated investigator who had noticed discrepancies in the system and was systematically documenting evidence of the theft. Her notes showed detailed observations about unusual transaction patterns, suspicious user accounts, and security breaches that matched perfectly with Reed's description of the collective's methods. One entry, dated 3 months before the collapse, read, "Observed multiple ghost transactions today, each lasting less than 0.3 seconds. Pattern suggests automated trading bot with access to user private keys. This is not random market activity. Someone is systematically draining accounts. Have documented all evidence and will present to Colonel Morrison tomorrow." Another entry from just weeks before the exchange collapsed. "Security breach confirmed. Unknown entity has root access to exchange servers. All user funds at risk. Recommend immediate shutdown and full investigation." If my suspicions are correct, we're dealing with a state-level actor or sophisticated criminal organization. As Krajcek read these entries aloud, the courtroom atmosphere shifted dramatically. Commander Thompson was no longer the cold, calculating mastermind. Portrayed by the prosecution, she was a dedicated officer who had tried to prevent the very crime she was accused of committing. The prosecutor, Elena Vasquez, looked genuinely shaken as she cross-examined Reed and reviewed Thompson's investigation files. It was becoming clear that the government's case was built on a foundation of assumptions and circumstantial evidence that couldn't withstand scrutiny. "Mr. Reed," Vasquez asked during cross-examination, "if the collective is responsible for this theft, why haven't they been caught?" Reed adjusted his glasses again, his nervousness returning. "Because they're extremely sophisticated, and they have help from someone inside law enforcement or the intelligence community. Someone who can redirect investigations and plant evidence to frame innocent people." This statement hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Reed was suggesting that someone within the government itself was working with the collective, helping them carry out their crimes while ensuring that others took the blame. Judge Matthews called a recess, and during the break, reporters flooded the courthouse steps with breaking news alerts. The trial that had begun as a straightforward case of military officer turned criminal had transformed into something far more sinister, a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and law enforcement. When court resumed, the prosecution made a desperate attempt to salvage their case. They brought in Agent Sarah Collins from the FBI's Cybercrime Division, who testified that the collective was indeed a known criminal organization, but that there was no evidence linking them to the Delta Vault theft. "We've been tracking the collective for 3 years," Agent Collins testified, "and while they are responsible for several cryptocurrency thefts, we have found no evidence of their involvement in Delta Vault. The technical analysis clearly shows that the theft was carried out using military-grade encryption that only someone with Commander Thompson's clearance level could access." But Krajcek was ready for this testimony. During cross-examination, he revealed that Agent Collins had been the lead investigator on 2 previous cases where the collective had been initially suspected, but the investigation was suddenly shifted to focus on other suspects, both of whom were later convicted and imprisoned. "Agent Collins," Krajcek asked pointedly, "in the case of the BitSafe exchange theft in 2022, didn't your initial report identify transaction patterns consistent with the collective's methods?" Collins shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Yes, but further investigation showed those patterns were coincidental." "And in the CryptoVault case in 2023, didn't you again find evidence pointing to the collective before the investigation was redirected to focus on Dr. Michael Stevens, who was subsequently convicted?" "The evidence against Dr. Stevens was overwhelming," Collins replied defensively. "But Dr. Stevens maintained his innocence, didn't he? And he claimed that someone had planted evidence in his personal computer systems." "Many criminals claim they've been framed, Mr. Krajcek. That doesn't make it true." Krajcek moved in for the kill. "Agent Collins, have you ever been contacted by anyone in the intelligence community about your investigations into the collective?" Collins's face went pale. That information is classified." "Your Honor," Krajcek addressed the judge, "I would like to request that Agent Collins be ordered to answer the question. My client's life hangs in the balance." Judge Matthews considered the request carefully. "Agent Collins, you will answer the question, but you may request to do so in chambers if it involves classified information." Collins looked around the courtroom desperately, as if seeking an escape route. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, "Yes. I've been contacted by members of the intelligence community regarding the collective investigations." "And what did these contacts tell you to do?" They advised me that pursuing the collective was not in the national interest, and that I should focus on more provable targets." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Victims in the gallery began shouting questions, reporters frantically typed on their phones, and Judge Matthews banged his gavel repeatedly to restore order. The implication was clear. Someone in the intelligence community was protecting the collective and ensuring that their crimes were blamed on innocent people. As the trial entered its final phase, the pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Reed returned to the stand with additional evidence he had uncovered during the trial recess. Working with a team of volunteer hackers, he had managed to trace some of the stolen Delta Vault funds to their current location, offshore accounts controlled by shell companies linked to known intelligence assets. "The money didn't disappear," Reed testified, his voice now confident and strong. "It was moved through a series of exchanges and converted into various cryptocurrencies before being deposited in accounts controlled by entities with ties to foreign intelligence services. This wasn't a simple theft. It was an intelligence operation designed to destabilize American confidence in cryptocurrency while funding covert operations." The revelation that the Delta Vault theft might have been an intelligence operation sent shockwaves through the government. Within hours of Reed's testimony, several high-ranking officials at the FBI and CIA were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But perhaps the most dramatic moment came when Commander Thompson herself took the stand. She had remained silent throughout most of the trial, communicating with her attorney through written notes and maintaining her military bearing despite the enormous pressure. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear and unwavering. "I swore an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic," she began, looking directly at the jury. "For 23 years I have kept that oath even when it meant putting my life at risk. I would never, under any circumstances, betray the trust that the American people have placed in me." Thompson's testimony was compelling not because of what she said, but because of who she was. As she described her military service, her dedication to her country, and her horror at discovering the theft at Delta Vault, it became impossible to believe that this woman was a criminal. Her voice broke only once when she addressed the victims directly. "To everyone who lost money in Delta Vault, I want you to know that I tried to stop it. I saw what was happening and I reported it to my superiors. I documented everything because I knew that innocent people would be hurt. I failed to prevent the theft, and for that I will carry guilt for the rest of my life. But I did not steal your money. I would rather die than betray my fellow Americans." The prosecution's closing argument was a desperate attempt to salvage a case that had crumbled before their eyes. Vasquez argued that the conspiracy theories about the collective and intelligence operations were elaborate smoke screens designed to confuse the jury and hide the simple truth, that Commander Thompson had used her position to steal money and was now trying to blame others for her crimes. But Krajcek's closing argument was a masterpiece of legal advocacy. He systematically destroyed every piece of the prosecution's case, showing how the evidence actually supported Thompson's innocence rather than her guilt. He reminded the jury of her military record, her voluntary cooperation with investigators, and most importantly, her own investigation that had tried to prevent the very crime she was accused of committing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Krajcek concluded, his voice heavy with emotion, "you have heard testimony that suggests this case is about far more than one woman's alleged crimes. You have heard evidence of a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of our government, of intelligence operations designed to steal from the American people while framing innocent patriots. Commander Mary Thompson is not the villain of this story, she is its hero. She saw the crime being committed and tried to stop it. She documented the evidence and reported it to her superiors. And when that wasn't enough, she was framed for the very crime she tried to prevent." The jury deliberated for 3 days. During that time, news broke that several members of the collective had been arrested in a coordinated international operation, and that recovered evidence confirmed their involvement in the Delta Vault theft. The timing seemed too convenient to be coincidental. It was as if powerful forces had finally decided that the truth could be revealed. When the jury returned with their verdict, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Commander Thompson stood at attention, her face a mask of disciplined composure, but her hands trembling slightly at her sides. The foreman, a retired engineer named Thomas Wilson, read the verdict with the gravity it deserved. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of money laundering, we find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of abuse of government resources, we find the defendant not guilty." The courtroom erupted in a mixture of cheers and tears. Victims who had spent months hating Commander Thompson now realized they had been manipulated into blaming an innocent woman. Several approached her after the verdict to apologize, including Margaret Chin, the retired nurse who had sat in the front row throughout the trial. "I'm sorry," Chin whispered to Thompson as they embraced. "I should have known that someone like you would never hurt us." Thompson's response was characteristic of her character. "You have nothing to apologize for, ma'am. You were hurt and you deserved answers. I just wish I could have done more to prevent it." In the weeks that followed, more details emerged about the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed an innocent woman's life. Congressional hearings revealed that a rogue faction within the intelligence community had indeed been working with the collective, using their thefts to fund unauthorized operations while framing innocent people to cover their tracks. Several high-ranking officials were arrested, and reforms were implemented to prevent similar abuses in the future. As for Commander Mary Thompson, she returned to active duty with her reputation not just restored, but enhanced. She was promoted to colonel and placed in charge of a new task force dedicated to combating cryptocurrency crimes and protecting American investors from sophisticated scams. Her first case involved tracking down the remaining members of the collective and recovering stolen funds for victims. The Delta Vault victims eventually recovered about 70% of their losses through a combination of seized assets and a victim compensation fund established by Congress. It wasn't everything they had lost, but it was enough for most to rebuild their lives. More importantly, they had learned that the real enemy wasn't the decorated soldier who had tried to protect them, but the shadowy criminals who had exploited their trust and patriotism. The trial of Commander Mary Thompson became a watershed moment in American justice, demonstrating that even in an age of sophisticated technology and complex financial crimes, the truth could still emerge when dedicated people refused to give up. It also served as a reminder that the real heroes are often those who stand up for what's right, even when the whole world seems to be against them. Years later, when asked about the ordeal, Commander Thompson would say simply, "I did my job. I saw Americans being hurt and I tried to protect them. That's what soldiers do." It was a typically modest response from a woman who had proven that integrity and honor still matter in a world that sometimes seems to have forgotten their value. The case files remain sealed, but those who lived through the trial remember it as the day when justice prevailed over conspiracy, when truth triumphed over deception, and when one woman's unwavering integrity helped expose a corruption that reached into the highest levels of power. Commander Mary Thompson didn't just clear her name, she helped restore faith in the system she had sworn to defend. In the end, the question wasn't whether Mary Thompson was guilty of the crime she was accused of committing. The question was whether the American people still believed in the principles of justice, integrity, and honor that she represented. The jury's verdict answered that question with a resounding yes, proving that even in the darkest times, the light of truth can still shine through.